In today's video, I wanted to share with you some of the results from last session, and I also wanted to share some things that I've come to note after examining these cyanotype prints. If you had seen part 5, you probably might remember this. This is the first print that I tried with the new cyanotype formula that I discovered and decided to try. This is just off of my balcony, and I wanted to see how well this would work if I was to take a photograph at a further distance. And this is the result. To be honest, I didn't think anything was going to work. The thing about this is after you've exposed the image, you can't really see anything on the paper. It's a very, very faint image. So it's hard to know whether or not there was enough exposure. But in this case, there was too much exposure. And when you really look closely, it does somewhat look solarized, but I didn't realize that until I had presented to a friend of mine. His name is Mohammed, who I shared this with, and he had told me that there was way too much exposure. Most of my previous tests were done at midday for a long period of time. So I still had that mindset to keep it as long as possible to make sure that it would expose well enough that it wouldn't rinse out in the water. That fear is taken away now, considering that I am now working with a different formula. Before moving forward, I just wanted to point out something. Some of you may probably be wondering what all these white lines are on the print. This is from the sponge brush that I was using to sensitize the paper with. I bought some new sponge brushes from Michael's. I usually always buy my brushes from Omer de Serre. It is a local craft store here in Montreal. When I was using the sponge brush from Michael's, it started to scrape the surface of the paper off. I've never ever had this problem before. After that little mishap, I then took a look at both of the sponge brushes to see why this issue happened with one and not the other. I did notice that with the sponge brush from Omer de Serre, it is a lot more porous. It also is a sponge that is a lot softer when dry when compared to Michael's sponge brush. This is not to throw down Michael's in any way. It's just to say that not all sponge brushes are made the same. Moving on to the following day, I decided to pull out the 8x10, having it worked with the 4x5 on the previous day. I was excited and I wanted to see, okay, how big can I get it? The image didn't come out too bad. It was exposed 30 minutes in open shade and 30 minutes in bright sun. This happened because at the time when I started to expose, the sun had not shifted over yet to where I get the most light. You can see the detail is pretty good in this. But what I get from this is the magnifying glass, although it can create some beautiful and even dreamy images, the magnifying glass is probably not the best option. It is beautiful, but I find I lose a little too much in the blurriness, at least for this particular process. I mean, this might change, I don't know. But detail is what I'm really looking to get alongside figuring out the shortest exposures possible one can get out in bright sun. This was the second image of the day. The first tray is just plain water, and the second is a mixed solution of potassium ferricyanide. This is so crazy because you can't really see much on the paper after it's been exposed, but within seconds, when it touches that potassium ferricyanide, the image appears. This image was exposed for 30 minutes. This print came out with a lot less contrast than the first one. With this print, I used a brush from Michael's, and I had a little bit of trouble trying to spread the emulsion, not to have too much of the paper peel off. The detail in this print is insane, and I love it. I really, really do. But there still is a lot to look into. For example, finding a lens that will help maximize overall sharpness. this was the final image of the day. And once again, I used the 4x5 box camera. With this image, I rinsed it in water too long. And as you can see, it's really not that great. And even though it's not the greatest, you can still see a good amount of detail. Now I want to move on to something that you will find quite interesting. Some of you might already be aware of this. 7 months ago, I conducted an experiment with the cyanotype and color filters. I believe that perhaps certain colors might have an effect on cyanotype, whether it would give more contrast or whether it would just lighten an area on the print. The experiment only proved that wherever the color filter was placed on the print, it would just lighten the area. And amongst each color filter, there was no differences. But I think now it will. In this case, I'm not referring to using any type of color filters, but referring to colors in general. I'm going to bring back two of the prints. One was taken with the 4x5 box camera and the other with the 8x10 box camera. This was the same subject matter. When you look closely, you will notice that one of the flowers out of the bunch appears to have a darker tone, and this is seen in both prints. The color of the flower that is seen in a darker tone on the print is a pink flower. So what does this mean? Will colors in a scene have an effect on a cyanotype print? And of course, I'm referring to this particular cyanotype process. And there's something else. This is a flower that I used in the last print, and you will notice that the tips of the petals are white. I had spray painted the tips of these petals when I was using them for some pinhole self-portraits, because the flower alone like that just came out too dark in the images. So keeping in mind that the tips are white, looking at the print, you will notice wherever the tips are white, on the print, they are blue. So I guess you can figure out what it is that I'm going to do next.